In May 1971, 2 United States congressmen flew to Vietnam on a fact-finding mission. They were not prepared for what they found. They came back and placed a report on the desk of the President of the United States. The report said nearly 1 in 3 American soldiers serving in Vietnam was addicted to heroin. Not experimenting, not using occasionally. Addicted, physically dependent. 1 in 3, in a war zone. With loaded rifles, this is how it happened. This is the story the army did not want told. Welcome to Saigon Files, Episode 3, The Drug That Broke an Army. To understand what happened to American soldiers in Vietnam, you need to understand one piece of geography: the Golden Triangle. The mountainous region where Burma, Laos and Thailand converge was, in the late 1960s, the single largest producer of raw opium on the planet. More than the Middle East. More than South America, the engine of the global heroin supply. And it shared a border with the country where 500,000 American boys were stationed. Before 1970, heroin was not the drug of choice in Vietnam. Soldiers smoked marijuana, the same thing their counterparts were smoking back home in San Francisco and on college campuses across America. Then, the military cracked down. Random urinalysis tests were introduced. Marijuana could be smelled. It stayed in the body for weeks. Heroin cleared the body in 48 hours. Use on Tuesday. Pass the test on Thursday. Walk free. Into that gap, the heroin market moved with terrifying speed. Vietnamese street vendors, many of them children, some connected to networks reaching back to the Golden Triangle through Laos, began selling heroin in small folded paper. Packets directly outside the gates of American military bases. The purity level was 95%. Street heroin in the United States at that time ran between 5 and 10%. The heroin in Vietnam was up to 20 times stronger. And it cost $5. A soldier on military pay could afford it every single day. By 1971, Department of Defense surveys produced numbers that nobody in the Pentagon wanted to believe. 34% of soldiers, 1 in 3, met the clinical definition of heroin addiction. The Steele-Murphy congressional report confirmed it. The crisis was real. It was massive. And it had been building for 2 years while the chain of command looked the other way. To understand what addiction did to the military in Vietnam, you have to understand what heroin does to a human body, and then imagine experiencing withdrawal in a jungle, on patrol, with an enemy that would kill you the moment you showed weakness. Heroin binds to receptors in the brain that regulate pain, fear, and the body's response to stress. A soldier on heroin felt calm in situations designed to produce terror. No fear, no pain, no dread of the violence that might be 1 second away. For a 19-year-old deep in the Vietnamese jungle, that was not a moral failure. It was, in the most literal sense, a survival response. But heroin produces physical dependence within days. When the drug is removed, the body revolts, sweating, vomiting, violent muscle cramps, extreme psychological agitation. Veterans who have described withdrawal say it does not feel like being sick. It feels like dying. Imagine experiencing that on a forward operating base 3 miles from an active enemy position. You cannot cry out. You cannot stop for a hospital. You cannot tell your commanding officer that your body has become physically dependent on something you bought outside the gate for $5, a substance you moved toward in. The first place because the army's own crackdown on marijuana left heroin as the only option that wouldn't show up on a test. Soldiers managed it the way soldiers manage every impossible thing. Silence. A man in withdrawal told his unit he had food poisoning. His buddies covered for him. Because in a war built on mutual survival, you always covered for your buddy. And when he could get access to the drug again, he used. Because stopping meant days of agony in a place that allowed for no agony at all. The army had created the condition. Then it made it illegal. Then it left the men inside it with no way out. When the Steele-Murphy report reached the Nixon White House in May 1971, the administration faced a domestic political crisis unlike anything it had acknowledged. The war was already despised, troop morale was at historic lows. And now, 1 in 3 soldiers was addicted to heroin. Nixon's response looked decisive. He declared drug abuse America's public enemy #1. He created the Special Action Office for Drug Abuse Prevention. He ordered the Department of Defense to establish treatment programs in Vietnam. On paper, it was action. The reality was Operation Golden Flow. Every soldier had to pass a urinalysis test before discharge. Test positive, you stayed in Vietnam, placed in detox, retested. Test clean, you got on the plane home. The effect was not treatment. It was timing. Heroin cleared the body in 48 hours. A soldier who wanted to go home, and by 1971 every soldier wanted to go home, simply stopped using long enough before his discharge date to test clean. He walked onto the plane. He flew 22 hours across the Pacific. He landed in the United States already in early withdrawal, sick in the terminal, sick in the taxi, sick at his own front door. And when he arrived, there was almost nothing waiting for him. In 1971, the Veterans Administration operated exactly 1 dedicated drug treatment clinic. 1. For hundreds of thousands of men who needed it. A VA official asked about this gap in a congressional inquiry gave an answer that has remained in the historical record. We admit the drug problem caught us by surprise. Caught them by surprise. After the urinalysis programs, after the Duddy surveys, after 2 years of watching it happen. They were surprised. The army had treated the test result. It had sent the disease home. The veterans filtered back into American life. Some stayed clean, many did not. The VA was underfunded, understaffed, and culturally unequipped to treat opioid addiction in men who also carried what we now call post-traumatic stress disorder, who had experienced moral injury that had no clinical name yet, who came home to a country that had decided it was easier to argue about the war than to look at the men it had made. The heroin epidemic among Vietnam veterans was the first warning signal of something America would spend the next half-century failing to learn, that opioid addiction does not. Respond to moral condemnation. It does not respond to incarceration. It responds to medicine, to time, to resources, and to the willingness to see the person suffering as a patient and not a criminal. Consider what had been done to these men. They were sent to a war they did not choose. The government gave them amphetamines through the front door to keep them aggressive. It watched heroin flood in through the back. It cracked down on the one drug that was visible and drove them toward the one that was not. It sent them home with a clean test result and called it treatment. And when they struggled, when they used to survive the nightmares and the memories and the pain that had no name yet, the country looked at them and said, addict. Not veteran. Not patient. Addict. The number I want you to carry out of this episode is not 34%. It is not 225 million amphetamine pills from episode 1. It is not the single VA drug clinic for hundreds of thousands of men. The number is 19. The average age of an American combat soldier in Vietnam was 19 years old. 19. Many had never left their home state. They were placed in 120-degree heat, in a jungle they had never seen, fighting an enemy they could not identify, for a war they increasingly did not understand. And when the chemistry of that war followed them home inside their own bodies, they were left to fight it alone. There is no clean ending to this story. There never is with stories like this one. There is only the obligation to know it, to hold it without turning away, and to understand that every veteran who struggled with addiction after Vietnam was not a failure of character. He was a consequence of policy. Next episode, the CIA's secret airline, the planes that flew into the Golden Triangle, the pilots who knew, the orders from above. Episode 4 of Saigon Files, the CIA knew. If this story deserves to be told, subscribe, because we are just getting started